welcome you all to the 5th Bola Chali event. I'm Anam Nawaz and I'm co-founder My Voice Unheard. This session is in collaboration with Daftar Khan, and Daftar Khan is a place, it's a co-working space that aims to bring together the society and bring together social innovators to build a stronger community. This session is also supported by Khalid, and we would like to thank him for his support in sponsoring this event. A little bit about My Voice Unheard for those who are unfamiliar with this. This was an initiative we started about, me and Hamad started about 2.5 years ago. And we found that there's a very negative image of Pakistanis all around the world, and we wanted to highlight the narratives and lives and stories of struggle of everyday Pakistani, and not just highlight the extremes. You see in the media, you always get to find out who's the first one to do something, and this first Pakistani did this, or you see a lot of negative news. But we also wanted to highlight what else is happening in Pakistan, what kind of productive work is happening. So we started collecting these stories and started publishing them online and received a great response. Our focus was on self-expression, because as a collectivistic culture, we're not taught to express ourselves. So we also wanted to highlight the invisible narrative that's all within us. You know, in our hearts, we have things that we want to say, but we never say them. So this platform was open for all those people who wanted to say some things, but weren't able to do so. And so we were there to support them. And through My Voice Unheard, eventually we extended it and created our product, which is Bola Chali. And in this, we extend the same vision, but instead of just writing stories or creating videos and documentaries, we're actually calling people, and we're actually creating a whole environment in which our guests and our speakers could create an experience and create a consciousness around the invisible narrative and around things that we're supposed to talk about, but we never do because we're afraid. So this is a collaborative space where we help each other out, and I would request everybody to please put their mobile phones on silent so that we can be very conscious about what our guest is going to say tonight. Today's theme is specific on mental health. And it's not just because of the recent socio-political situation that there are more cases of post-traumatic disorders, depression and anxiety has reached its peak at this time in Pakistan, but also because we're specifically going to talk about women's health, mental health issues, and especially because mental health is something that has been ignored for a very long time, probably because we're still a developing nation. But mental health is a very integral part of our life, and without our brain functioning properly, we cannot function properly. So we need to start having more conversations around mental health issues. And secondly, because women need their space to talk about their mental health issues, and men and women together need to work this thing out so that we could be stronger as a community. And today's talk is going to be specifically for women belonging to marginalized communities, women belonging to villages, for example, who do not have social support. They have a lot of pressures. So what do we do? What kind of challenges do they face? And how, as a community, we could be a part of their lives and help them out to be stronger individuals and ultimately aim to be a stronger society. Today we have as our guest speaker Lisa Cherry. She has been working with vulnerable children in educational settings as well as fostering houses. And she's a trainer, she's a coach, she's a keynote speaker and an author. And her mission is to promote accessible knowledge around the themes of trauma and resilience, and from moving from a journey of pain to recovery. So, and Lisa brings with us about 3 decades of experience of working in the educational settings, social settings, and her own personal journey of self-recovery, which we will find out more later. So to begin with, Lisa, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking.
Okay.
And that's the first clue, really, is asking somebody how you're doing.
Yes.
So that's really good. I'm doing very well, and I'm really, really excited to be here. How amazing is that we can come and do this and we can have a conversation. How wonderful that the world is now a place where we can do that and we can have those conversations.
Technology.
Amazing.
All right. So, Lisa, you've been working with children who have been affected by trauma at a very young age and who have suffered greatly in their life. So can you tell us more about the kind of work that you do? What's the scope? What exactly do you do?
Okay, so I haven't done direct work with children now for about 8 or 9 years. And so now my work is very much around working with those who do direct work and supporting them in how to help work with children in a way that supports and promotes recovery. So we would look at that. So I go into schools, I work with foster carers, adopters, I'm not sure, so children living away from home, so living away from their birth families. So I think you have lots of different organisations here that do that sort of work. And we have the same in England as well. So I work with them on thinking about and understanding, firstly, how trauma impacts upon an individual, how trauma impacts upon a developing child, and how we can have supportive environments so that if trauma happens, the environment is able to manage and handle that, because trauma, lots of different types of trauma, is actually very much part of the human existence, and how we recover and heal from that and adapt from that in a way that keeps societies cohesive is, I think one of the work of the now. I think that's the work of the now.
Yeah, I agree, because a lot of times we know we've been through something, but we don't know how to deal with it, and we just let it pass by and never think about it, how it impacts us. So it's important to bring consciousness around the fact that we have been traumatized and we need to do something about it.
Yeah. And when you talk about something happening, something happens to us and we don't talk about it and we think that we can just suppress and suppress and suppress,
yes,
that's when we have an issue. That's when we have a difficulty, because that's when, so there's a wonderful book called The Body Keeps Score, and the body knows when something has happened, and the mind and the body are not two separate places. They're all happening around each other. And so I think that's a really important point, to think about this idea that we can just pretend something hasn't bothered us or something hasn't affected us. Actually, it's always going to need to be dealt with. Yeah.
I have something to say, but that's gonna just detrack us.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, guys. We both are psychology background, so we go off track. Right. So I was thinking that, Lisa, it requires a very humanistic heart to start doing something like that you're doing to start working with people who have suffered greatly, because you listen to their trauma every other day, and you ingrain a lot of things, you absorb a lot of their trauma in yourself. What got you into this field, and what's your story of being related to a field that's so stressful?
Well, I think the driver for all the people working with vulnerability, with trauma, with creating change, that driver often is, whether we know it or not, often is something to do with something that we've experienced or we've recovered from. And so for me, my driver, my passion is very much about my experiences as a young person being looked after away from home in some of those settings that we were talking about, and what that did to me and how I needed to recover from it. And I was very, very lucky, because you were talking about expression. I'm very expressive. So from a very young age, I was very able to say, there's something wrong, this is not okay, I can't live like this, I don't want this, I need to get well, I need to heal, I need recovery. There's a lot in there about need, about expression, about autonomy, and about having that voice. And I'm hoping we can explore that today, because I think there's a lot of keys there in terms of accessing support. So I think in terms of drivers, that's very much what underpins my desire to try and make a difference, to try and have connections with human beings that enable us to make a better society, where we have that ability to say what you said to me earlier. You were able to express something, and also to say, and how are you? How is it for you today? And to have those kind of connections. And it doesn't matter where in the world we're having those conversations, our humanness actually is what I'm really interested in. We were talking earlier about where we're different, culturally, cultural difference and culture. And then there's this space in the middle where we're the same. And that's humanity. That's what that's called. That's called humanity. And that's what I'm interested in, connecting in that way with any human. And I want to be connected with by any human too. I need that connection too.
Right. So, talking about cultures, you've been to so many countries. What have you gained about mental health issues, especially pertaining to women? Are there any differences in Eastern and Western cultures, or what have you observed specific to women health?
I think you raised earlier we were talking about Pakistan is a very collectivist society, yes, which brings with it many gifts. It's coming into a culture where people are so lovely and warm and connecting and giving and kind, and that's a beautiful thing. And in the West, we're very individualistic. I'm not so sure that's a very beautiful thing. I think there's a space in the middle where we can all meet, perhaps, and we can share some of that. I think that would be my utopian society. But in terms of thinking about women and the particular issues that I've seen here, I think are around autonomy and choice. And if you are not waking up, making decisions about your life, they are someone else's decisions about your life, I'm not sure how that doesn't impact upon your mental health. So I think that for me is an interesting one. that I would love to unpick with you around your experience of that. Mental health, in terms of thinking about over in England, the situation around mental health and women. We have, so for example, suicide of men is quite a big issue in England. So I think 78% of suicides are men, which is very, very high. So the way that, one of the other things that I do understand, I think, is the way that men and women express their distress is different. And I think we have to take heed of that. We have to understand the differences about how we express our own mental distress.
So what are some of the differences that you've observed pertaining to women in your travels?
Mm-hmm. So women are much more likely to experience depression, self-harming. They tend to go internally with distress and pain, and men tend to, and it's very general, men tend to express their distress in a very outward way. So that's a very important, something important to think about in terms of how, then if we have different ways of expressing our distress, then we have to have different ways of approaching it. But I think we have to understand that women will have better mental health where they have more autonomy and choices about their life and what they want to do in their life, I think.
Yeah, but sometimes women don't want to take the autonomy because they're groomed that way. So what do you do then?
Yeah, well, that's very complex stuff, because if we understand how we're built, how our brain develops, then we understand there's a whole, we can't separate, as we said earlier, from society any more than society can separate from us. You know, it's a return and serve experience that builds us and builds our internal architecture in terms of thinking about how we view the world and the lens by which we view the world and the lens by which we see the world. I think what you're doing is incredibly important. I think having conversations, growing awareness, you know, for me, I can just come here and have a conversation. It's the conversations that everybody in this room can then go on and have, and that everybody watching the video can go on and have. That's where there is change and there is shift and there is growth, and you can develop something that feels right for your culture, that embeds your cultural beliefs and needs. You know, I think we have so much to learn from each other. Yeah.
Right, so in terms of young girls who suffer from adverse experiences at a young age, how does that affect their development and their identity formation up until teenage and then as adults? Mm-hmm. And by adverse effects, I mean trauma or abuse or harassment, any sort of adverse experiences.
Mm-hmm. The research that we have and the knowledge that we have around trauma is that it fundamentally erodes every aspect of your being. It fundamentally erodes every aspect of your sense of self. It can, depending on when and how and what has happened and what the support network around what has happened is like, alter the very structure of how the brain develops. That's what lots of research, scientific research, has found. But it alters the way you view the world. It creates a state of hypervigilance. It creates a state of unworthiness. It fundamentally alters your perception of who you are. And the thing about recovering from trauma is it requires compassionate, connecting relationships. So where you have trauma, and then what sits around that is silence, then we have a problem, which is one of the reasons I love the philosophy around what you're doing, because what you're doing is you're saying, let's not be silent. Yeah. Let's not be silent about what has happened, because if we are silent about what has happened, we can't recover from it. Recovery from trauma is about me telling you what happened to me, you listening to what happened to me, and you meeting that with empathy and connection repeatedly. So relationships have to be not complicit in the trauma. Does that make sense?
To me, yeah.
Does that make sense? We will explore this maybe a little later.
Yeah. When we open for questions.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So definitely there is a huge gap between when somebody is going through trauma and the after effects, and as a collectivistic society that Pakistan is, we're always asked not to express, especially the girls are asked not to express because it doesn't look nice, and the guys are also asked not to express because if you express, you're not a guy, right? So definitely there needs to be more support in that sense, and this is one of the reasons why My Voice Unheard tries to bring people together to talk about what ails them, so that we could gather other people who are hurt, and together we could maybe perhaps relieve that pain for each other. Extending from our previous conversation, when girls especially who have been through trauma, they grow up with all that gap in their personality and in their identity, what are some of the mental health issues that they're more prone to, and there's more risk?
Well, I think certainly in Western culture that would be displayed very much through self-harming behaviours, eating disorders, depression, those kind of areas. But more importantly than that, those girls, without having recovery or without having intervention or without, because we don't have to revisit the trauma to recover from it. That's the other important thing. We just need connection and support. But those women are then going to go on and have their children.
Yes.
And I think that's something that's really crucial in terms of thinking about an intervention, because all of that stress and anxiety and worry then passes through the placenta to the baby, who, if she's a girl, then continues in that cycle. And that's where there is a real opportunity, a massive opportunity. And that's not an issue just for Pakistan. By any stretch of the imagination, that is a global concern about how we support women in maternity to ensure that they have the best possible services and the best possible opportunity to have their baby calmly and safely. So that I often say, with a pregnant woman, if you scattered the floor with petals and massaged her as she's walking past, we'd heal the world. That's how we'll heal the world.
I think another important challenge whenever I think of such cases is that whenever somebody is suffering from a mental illness, or I would say a mental ailment, it kind of trickles down the family, because if I'm unwell, there are certain behaviors that my family is going to observe, and they're going to internalize which is going to disturb them, and then they're going to react to it. When they react to it, that's going to affect me again. So this is a vicious cycle.
Yes.
Is there a way out?
Well, yeah, it starts with you. That's kind of how it works, you know. Because the other thing that's really important as well to think about in terms of that kind of cycle is we carry as well in our bodies the pain of our ancestors. You know,
right.
So if we think about what are we carrying that doesn't even belong to us, that isn't ours, that goes way back, you know.
Right.
So the best thing that we can do is to focus on being as well as we can. And you know what? That can take a long time. You know, this is not easy work done in an instant, you know. This is stuff that you make a daily decision and don't always get right. And sometimes you have to try again and be kind to yourself. It's daily work to create that change so that you're not in that cycle. But that's why these conversations are so important, because each person in this room can start that process, can make a decision, and may have made the decision and be on that journey, or they may decide today's the day. Today's the day I'm going to make that. I'm going to make that decision, and I'm going to heal me, because I can't change you. I can't change what my ancestors did, and I can't change the behavior of any human in this room. The only person I can do anything about is myself. And whether that's individualistic or collectivist, I don't know, but that's where it has to begin. And that has, in a collectivist society, it's even better because it ripples.
Yes.
It ripples.
Yep. There's support system that's
Yes.
not in the individualistic cultures, so definitely.
Yeah.
Another question, in particular to Pakistani culture, not the culture, but the country. Here, people are unable to meet their bare necessities at times, right? So mental health is way down the list. It's way down the priority list. Nobody thinks about it. What's your opinion of addressing this challenge as a community?
I don't really know the answer to that, other than that's a structural issue. That has to be a structural issue, because here's the thing: if you can't meet your very, very basic needs, and I'm talking about your food, you're talking about warmth, safety, security, those things, then your mental health is going to be impacted anyway. You know,
Sure.
You have to be able to meet those base needs. And, you know, this may be a surprise to you, and it'll be relative poverty, of course. But in England, there are families who don't have enough money for food and go to food banks. You know, and so we are having those same conversations. Again, it's relative poverty, of course. But we're having those same conversations. How can you, if you can't meet your basic needs, how can you have a stable mental health? Then how do you perform in your society and contribute to your society? And when we're thinking about gender equality, which I suspect is where you're heading next, if 50% of the population are not contributing into an economy, that has a massive impact into that very structure that enables that those needs to be met, which would make things better around mental health. Everything is interrelated.
Yeah, true. As a psychologist as well, I often think about women from marginalized communities, women who do not have social support, say women who are living in the villages, they do not have enough education, and they have no idea about good mental health, right? So how do you suggest we address that challenge of supporting those women who are struggling every day more than anybody else they're struggling for clean water. So how do you, they're in a state of emergency, and so how do you suggest we as a community who are able people who want to volunteer, a lot of students here, I'm sure they're always up for volunteering. How do you suggest we start helping such marginalized women to be more aware of their mental health and to identify areas where they could work for a better living standard?
Again, I can only humbly offer any kind of thoughts that come into my mind around that. And I know there are lots of different charities that are doing specific pieces of work in those communities. And I think it's important, what I've seen that works the best within communities are people from their communities. So doing projects that enable people within those communities to learn and use charities to help them learn about the things that you're talking about and about mental health, so that they can go back into the communities and educate, because they have that knowledge and experience of those struggles, of that life, of what dealing with that looks like, which makes them more easy for people then to talk to. But you need key people in each community who are supported to be able to do that. Is one idea that I would think would be really helpful.
All right. How about women who seem to be economically stable, who are living in the cities, who on the surface look just fine? What do you suggest for them, how to grow up their children to be healthy, mentally healthy individuals?
Emotional intelligence, which I was talking about with this lovely lady here, who's going to be doing some projects around that. So learning the language of expression, very helpful. And the other thing, and I see women doing this all over the world, this competitive stuff, women competing, that is not helpful at all. We have to be sisters, and we have to be supportive of each other and work together, not be competing about who's got what and who's got the nicest whatever. I mean, I'm not really interested in it. I can barely buy myself a lipstick. But that kind of competitiveness between women prevents women from actually working together, and being cohesive and doing the things that need doing in those kind of communities. So I would say that those two issues really come to mind around how you teach your children in a safe, contained way about expressing those emotions and expressing what's going on and just talking about what's happening and making talking okay. So that, because here's the other thing that's really important in this conversation, especially if we're thinking about protecting children from trauma, then we have to reduce silence. We have to reduce silence. We have to make a space for children to be able to say, this is happening to me and it's not okay and I don't like it and I want it to stop, and for that to be met with the response of, we're going to do something about this and stop it.
Yeah. Instead of that, I'm sure a lot of times our children get shunned and they're asked not to further talk about something that some parents consider might not be appropriate. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something we need to work on, especially with kids being more sensitive now. Mm-hmm. I've seen in my personal experience that they do try to express, but sometimes the parents wouldn't let them express. And as we were talking about collectivistic cultures, the pros and the cons, although in our society there's more social support, but at the same time, there are certain restrictions and limitations that you cannot cross, which would ultimately ail somebody's mental health.
Yeah.
My last question before we open for questions from the guests, from the audience, is Lisa, what brings you to Pakistan, and what do you aim to do here while you're here, and what's your plan for the upcoming years? What do you want to do in Pakistan?
Well, I'm in Pakistan because of Safina, the lovely Safina, who came to hear me speak. I was talking about trauma at an event at the House of Lords in London, and Safina came. We were connected on Twitter, and she said, "Oh, I'd love to take you to Pakistan." I was like, "Yeah, let's go to Pakistan." And that's kind of that's as sophisticated as that was, really. But really, for me, it's about what I can learn and what I can give and what we can share and how we can become closer. And I think Pakistan is portrayed very badly in the media. Not just the Western media, I think in the media here. I don't think I got quite ranty about mass media when I was last here, because I don't think it's very helpful at all. And I think it's an important message, really, to be able to share about another country. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's important, because the problem with division and cultural division is that it's out of fear and ignorance. And through lack of experience, you're well-travelled yourself and you've lived in other countries, and when you have that opportunity, that breaks down fear. And when we break down fear, then we have connection. And when we have connection, then we have healing and recovery. And that has got to be the goal, because the world is not a fantastically happy place right now. And I would rather be part of the solution than part of the problem.
Sounds like a plan. Lisa, thank you very much for joining us today, and I'm so glad that everybody has been here. I would like to say thank you to Daftar Khan again for supporting My Voice Unheard as always, and being here for us and making this possible. I would also like to thank Amar Khalid, who has been our sponsor for this event, and I hope that with your support we're able to do more events in the future surrounding the narratives that we haven't really been talking about, and the stories that have been condemned to amnesia. We need to speak up, and we need to talk about things that ail us so that we can grow up together as a society.